34 weeks pregnant, I watched my roommate carry my baby's crib onto the front lawn at 2 a.m. My roommate threw every piece of my baby furniture onto my front lawn at 2 in the morning, and my neighbors watched from their windows, and I stood at my door 34 weeks pregnant, and understood that the person I had trusted with a key to my home had never been who I believed she was. Not an argument that escalated slowly. Not a misunderstanding that grew. One conversation at my front door. 1 hour. And then the specific sound of a wooden crib hitting concrete at 2 in the morning in a neighborhood that had been completely quiet 30 minutes before. I want to tell you everything? Not the version I have been telling people who ask, which leaves out the parts that make me look like I missed things I should have seen. The full version. The one that starts 8 months before the crib hit the concrete and includes everything I chose to ignore because I needed to believe in the person I had let into my home. Her name is Jade. We had been friends for 4 years before she moved in. Not close friends in the way of people who know each other's interior lives. Friends in the way of people who exist in the same social circle and have always gotten along, and whose relationship has never been tested by anything significant enough to reveal what it is actually made of. That was my first mistake. Calling it a friendship without ever having tested it. I was 7 months pregnant when she moved in. The baby's father had left 4 months earlier, not dramatically, just the specific quiet exit of a man who had decided that the version of his life that included a baby was not the version he wanted, and I had been managing the pregnancy alone with the specific focused determination of someone who has decided that determination is the available substitute for the support they do not have. I had a 3-bedroom house. I had a mortgage that had been manageable on 2 incomes and that was significantly less manageable on 1. When Jade mentioned that her lease was ending and she was looking for a place, I had done the calculation that people do when practicality and loneliness are both present at the same time, and the calculation had produced an obvious answer. She moved in on a Saturday in March. She had more stuff than I had anticipated and less consideration for where things went than I had hoped, but I had told myself these were the ordinary adjustments of 2 people learning to share a space and that they would resolve themselves once we found our rhythm. Some of them resolved. Others did not resolve so much as calcify into the specific permanent friction of 2 people whose domestic habits were not compatible, and who had made the decision to share a space before discovering that incompatibility. She left dishes. Not occasionally. As a consistent practice. The dishes were the first thing. Then the bathroom. Then the specific way she had of using the kitchen after I had cleaned it, not maliciously, just with the complete absence of awareness that someone else had done work in that space and might have a feeling about it being immediately returned to its previous condition. I said things. Carefully at first. Then more directly. She received the things I said with the expression of someone who is performing the reception of feedback without actually updating anything in response to it. She would say, "Of course, and I'll be better, and I'm sorry about that," and then the next day the dishes would be there. I absorbed it. I was 30 weeks pregnant and tired in the specific bone-deep way of the 3rd trimester, and the calculation I kept making was that the financial relief of her rent was worth the friction of the dishes and the bathroom and the kitchen and the accumulation of small daily things that were costing me something I did not have a lot of available to spend. Then she started having people over. Not occasionally. Regularly. On weeknights as well as weekends. The specific rotating presence of a social life being conducted inside a space that also contained a woman in her 3rd trimester who needed sleep and quiet, and the particular stillness of a home that felt like a home and not a venue. I said things about this too. More directly than I had said the things about the dishes, because the sleep was not a preference. It was a medical necessity that my doctor had been specific about. She received these things the way she received the others. Of course. I'll be better. I'm sorry about that. The people kept coming. At 32 weeks I had a conversation with my doctor about my BLD pressure. The conversation had the specific careful quality of a medical professional communicating concern without wanting to produce panic. She said my levels were elevated in a way she wanted to monitor closely. She said stress reduction was not optional. She said she needed me to take the next 6 weeks seriously in terms of my environment. I drove home from that appointment and I sat in the car in my driveway for 20 minutes. I thought about the dishes and the bathroom and the kitchen and the people on weeknights, and the specific quality of sleep I had been getting in my own home for the past 8 weeks. I thought about the baby. 32 weeks along. 8 weeks until the due date. 8 weeks of needing my home to be the specific kind of environment my doctor had just told me I needed it to be. I went inside. Jade was in the kitchen. I told her I needed to talk to her about something important. I told her about the doctor's appointment. I told her about the BLD pressure. I told her that I needed to ask her to move out before the baby arrived, and that I understood this was significant news and that I wanted to give her as much time as I could to find a new place. I told her she had 6 weeks. I told her I would help her in any way I could. I told her I valued our friendship, and that this was a practical decision based on a medical situation and not a reflection of anything personal about her or about our relationship. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, 6 weeks. I said, I know it's not a lot of time. I want to help you find something. She said, I moved in 2 months ago. I said, I know. And I am sorry the timing is what it is. But my doctor was clear, I need to take this seriously. She said, you want me out before the baby comes? I said, yes. She said, fine. That was all she said. Fine. In the tone of someone who has received information they are not yet fully processing and whose first available word is the word that ends the conversation without engaging with its content. She went to her room. I went to mine. I lay in the dark and I thought about the conversation and whether it had gone as well as I had hoped and whether fine was a word that contained what it was supposed to contain or something more complicated. The next 3 weeks were the specific weeks of a shared space in which something has been said that cannot be unsaid and both people are navigating around it with varying degrees of awareness and skill. Jade was present but distant in the way of someone who is managing something internally that they have not yet brought into the external. She was not hostile. She was not warm. She was performing the functional coexistence of a person who has been told something and has not yet decided what to do with it. I thought she was processing. I thought she was looking for a new place. I thought fine had meant fine. At 5 weeks she had not found anything. She had not looked for anything. I know she had not looked for anything because I made the mistake of asking her how the search was going and she told me, in a tone that was the first openly hostile thing she had said to me since the conversation, that she had not found anything yet and that finding a place in 5 weeks was not as simple as I apparently believed it to be. I said, do you need help with the search? I can help you look. She said, I don't need your help. I said, Jade, I need you to have a plan. The baby is coming in 5 weeks, and I need to know this is moving forward. She said, I heard you the first time. I said, okay. I called my doctor that evening. Not about the BLD pressure specifically. About the general situation and what the stress of it was producing in my body. My doctor said the BLD pressure had stabilized at my last appointment but that stability was conditional on the environmental factors that had produced it and that any return of the previous conditions was likely to return the previous readings. I said, what do I do if the situation does not resolve before the baby arrives? She said, you make sure it resolves. At 1 week before the 6-week deadline I knocked on Jade's door. I asked her directly where things stood with finding a new place. She said she had looked at 2 apartments. She said neither of them had worked out. She said she was still looking. I said, Jade. 1 week. I need to know you have somewhere to go in 1 week. She said, I'm doing my best. I said, I know. And I need your best to produce a result in 1 week. She said, what happens if I am not out in 1 week? I said, I need you to be out in 1 week. She said, that is not an answer. I said, it is the only answer I have. This is my home and my baby is coming and I need you to honor what I asked you for 6 weeks ago. She looked at me. The specific look of someone who has been managing something internally for 6 weeks and has just decided that the management is finished. She said, I'll be out. The 6th week ended on a Thursday. She was not out. Her things were still in her room. Her car was still in the driveway. When I came home from my Thursday prenatal appointment, she was sitting on the couch watching something on television with the ease of someone who has made a decision about the space they occupy and is not anticipating that decision being challenged. I stood in the doorway of my own living room. I said her name. She looked at me. I said, it is Thursday. She said, I know. I said, we agreed on Thursday. She said, I need more time. I said, Jade. She said, 2 more weeks. Just 2 more weeks and I will have something. I said, I cannot give you 2 more weeks. The baby is due in 2 weeks. She said, then we figure it out together. I said, there is nothing to figure out together. This is my home. The agreement was 6 weeks. 6 weeks is today. She said, you would really put me out on the street. I said, I gave you 6 weeks in medical necessity and the offer of help finding something and you have not treated any of those things with the seriousness they deserved. She stood up. And I saw something on her face that I had not seen in the previous 6 weeks of distance and management. Something that was not processing or managing or the quiet strategy of someone playing a longer game. She was completely furious. She said, you think you can just decide people's lives for them because you own something? I said, I'm asking you to honor an agreement. She said, you made a unilateral decision when you were convenient for me to leave and called it a conversation. I said, I gave you 6 weeks. She said, you gave me 6 weeks because it was convenient for you. Not because you care about me. You used me for the rent and now you want me gone and you are dressing it up as a medical situation. I said, my BLD pressure was elevated. My doctor was specific. She said, your doctor. Your baby. Your house. Everything is yours. I said, yes. This is my house. And I need you to leave it. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, you are going to regret this. She went to her room. I went to mine. I called my mother. I told her what had happened. My mother said she was coming over. I said I was okay. She said she was coming anyway. She arrived 45 minutes later and we sat in the kitchen and I told her everything and she sat with the specific steady quality of a woman who has been a mother for long enough to know when a situation has a direction that is not going to be stopped by talking. At midnight I woke up to a sound I did not immediately identify. By the time I was fully awake I had identified it. It was the sound of my front door opening. Then footsteps. Then a sound from somewhere outside that my body understood before my mind did. I got up. I went to the window. Jade was on my front lawn. She had my baby's crib in her hands. She placed it on the lawn with the specific deliberate force of someone making a statement rather than someone struggling with weight. Then she went back inside. She came back out with the changing table. I stood at my bedroom window 34 weeks pregnant and watched my roommate carry my baby's furniture onto my front lawn piece by piece, and I did not move for 4 minutes because my body was doing the specific calculation of a woman who needs to respond to something and who is also 34 weeks pregnant and whose doctor has told her that stress is not optional and who is standing at a window at midnight trying to determine what response is available to her that does not make the situation worse than it already is. Then I called the police. Not dramatically. Not from anger. From the specific clarity of someone who has understood that what is happening outside her window is not a conversation and is not a negotiation and is not something that she has any personal tool available to address at midnight while 34 weeks pregnant. The call took 4 minutes. The officer arrived in 12. I watched from the window until the patrol car pulled up and then I went downstairs and opened the front door. Jade was on the lawn with the patrol car's lights on her and my baby's furniture arranged on the grass in the specific deliberate formation of someone who had been working with a plan rather than in chaos. The crib. The changing table. The small dresser I had spent 3 weeks painting the right shade of white. The mobile I had assembled on a Tuesday evening 4 weeks earlier while watching something I could not now remember because the assembly had required the kind of focus that crowds out everything else. All of it on my front lawn at 2 in the morning. The officer was a woman. She looked at the furniture. She looked at Jade. She looked at me in the doorway 34 weeks pregnant. She did the rapid assessment of a person whose profession requires rapid assessment and she said to Jade, calmly and without inflection, "Can you explain what is happening here?" Jade said, "I'm moving out." The officer said, "At 2 in the morning." Jade said, "She told me to leave." The officer looked at me. I said, "I asked her to be out by today." She was not out. I went to sleep. I woke up to this. The officer said, "Is this your furniture?" I said, "Yes. Everything on the lawn is mine. It was in the room being prepared for my baby." The officer looked at the furniture. Then she looked at Jade with the specific expression of a professional who has seen many situations and has rapidly categorized this one. What followed was the specific procedural process of a situation that has police involvement, and a clear physical record and a heavily pregnant woman standing at her front door at 2 in the morning. Jade was told she needed to return my property to the location she had removed it from. She was told this calmly and twice. She did not comply with the calm version. The second version produced compliance of the specific grudging variety that it is technically compliance and nothing more. She carried the furniture back in. Each piece with the energy of someone who is performing a required action while communicating through every movement that the performing of it is not an acceptance of its requirement. The crib. The changing table. The dresser. The mobile, which she had disassembled at some point during the process for reasons I did not ask about because I was standing at my door at 2 in the morning 34 weeks pregnant and the reasons were not the thing that mattered. My neighbors were awake. 3 of them were visible at windows. One was standing on her porch. The specific audience of a neighborhood that has been woken up by something unusual and has not yet returned to sleep. After the furniture was back inside, the officer spoke to both of us separately. She asked me if I felt safe in my home. I said I did not know. She said she could not remove Jade that night without a formal eviction process but that she was documenting the incident, and that if I had concerns about my safety I should call again immediately. She said, "Do you have somewhere you can go tonight?" I said, "This is my home." She said, "I understand. I'm asking if you have somewhere safe you can go while this situation is being resolved." I called my mother at 2:40 in the morning. She was already awake. She said she was coming. I said I was coming to her instead. I packed a bag with the specific efficiency of someone operating on the practical layer that exists above emotion, and I got in my car and I drove to my mother's house, and I did not sleep until almost 5 in the morning. The formal process began the following day. My landlord status and Jade's tenant status had a specific legal relationship that my lawyer navigated with the documentation from the previous night's incident as part of the foundation. The process was not fast. It was also not as slow as I had feared. The incident had produced a record that made the legal situation clearer than it might otherwise have been. Jade moved out 16 days later. Not voluntarily in the full sense. In the specific way that people move out when the alternative has become legally and practically unavailable to them. She took her things in 3 trips across one day, and she did not speak to me once during any of those trips. I was present for all of them because my lawyer had advised me to be present and to document. The baby arrived 9 days after Jade's last trip. 3 weeks early, which my doctor said was not directly caused by the events of the previous weeks but which was also not unrelated to the stress that those weeks had produced in a body that had been managing elevated BLD pressure and had been asked to manage significantly more than that in the final 6 weeks. My daughter was 4 pounds 11 ounces. She spent 9 days in the neonatal unit before she was ready to come home. I spent those 9 days traveling between my mother's house and the hospital in the specific suspended state of someone who is waiting for the most important thing and cannot do anything to accelerate its arrival. My mother was with me for all of it. My 2 closest friends took turns being present in ways that I had not asked them to be present but that I needed more than I understood until it was happening. The community of a pregnancy lived in public is something I had not fully understood until the public nature of it produced people who showed up without being asked. Jade sent me one message. It arrived the day after my daughter was born. I do not know how she found out the baby had arrived. The message said, "I hope she is healthy." I did not respond. Not from anger. From the understanding that what was in that message was not the beginning of a conversation I had any available resource to have. The friendship, such as it was, did not survive. I have thought carefully about that word, friendship, and what it actually describes when applied to what Jade and I had. We had coexisted in the same social circle for 4 years without the relationship ever being tested by anything significant enough to reveal what it was made of. When it was finally tested, it revealed that it was not made of the things that friendships need to be made of to survive a significant test. That is not Jade's failure entirely. I had called it a friendship without examining what I was calling. I had invited someone into my home based on social proximity and financial necessity, and had not asked the prior questions that sharing a home with someone requires. Who are you when things are difficult? What do you do when you are asked to do something inconvenient? What is your relationship to agreements that stop being convenient for you after you have made them? I had not asked those questions. The 2 in the morning answer was the price of not asking them earlier. My daughter came home on a Tuesday. I carried her through my front door and I stood in the hallway and I looked at the space where the furniture had been before it was carried onto the lawn and I thought about what the last 6 weeks had cost. The BLD pressure and the sleep and the early arrival and 9 days in the neonatal unit and the specific weight of going through all of it in a way that was harder than it needed to be because I had made a decision about who to let into my home without asking the questions that the decision required. She is 7 months old now. She sleeps in the crib that was on my front lawn at 2 in the morning. I put her to sleep in it every night and I look at it and I think about the woman who carried it outside and the specific information that carrying it outside contained about who she was and what our 4 years of social proximity had actually been. I do not think about it with anger anymore. I think about it the way I think about information that arrived in an expensive form. Expensive information is still information. What you do with it matters more than what it cost. What I did with it was ask better questions. About the people I let close. About the difference between proximity and friendship. About what I actually know about a person before I give them a key to the space where I am most vulnerable. I know more now. I know it because of a crib on a lawn at 2 in the morning. I know it because my daughter came early and spent 9 days in the neonatal unit and I sat next to her in a hospital room, and I thought about every decision I had made in the previous 8 months and what I would ask before making them again. I would ask, when this person is tested, what do they do? I would ask, when I ask them for something that costs them something, how do they respond? I would ask, is what I am calling a friendship, or is it a comfortable proximity that has never had to be anything more? These are not complicated questions. They are the questions I did not ask. And the not asking them produced a crib on my front lawn and a baby born 3 weeks early and a woman standing in a doorway at 2 in the morning watching her neighbor watch her from a porch. Some lessons arrive in the middle of the night when you are 34 weeks pregnant and completely unprepared for them. The only useful thing you can do with a lesson that arrives that way is make sure you never need to learn it again. My daughter is asleep in her crib. The one that was on the lawn. The one that is now exactly where it belongs, in the room I painted for her, with a mobile assembled above it, in a home that has locks I chose and a door that opens for people I have asked the right questions about first. She does not know what the crib has been through. She just sleeps in it. I know what it has been through. And I will remember it every single time I decide who deserves a key to the place where the people I love are most vulnerable. Some people show you who they are at 2 in the morning with your property in their hands. Believe what they show you. Every single time. The 2 in the morning version is always the true one.